So, are you ready to discover the magic of fireflies in Florida? I know many of you may not have ever seen fireflies in Florida, but I guarantee you they're here. We are the state with more species of fireflies residing here than any other state in the country. Tonight, feature presenter Richard Joyce, an endangered species conservation biologist at the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, will introduce us to the wonder of fireflies as he describes their history and conservation with a focus on the species found in Florida, particularly the Florida intertidal firefly, an imperiled species that may be awaiting discovery, perhaps by you in Palm Beach County. You'll also learn about the threats to fireflies and how they can be addressed, and about an activity called fireflying and how you can participate in the Firefly Atlas, a community service project of the Xerces Society, edited by your presenter. Before joining the Xerces Society 3 years ago, Richard worked at the Nature Conservancy in Maine, the Maine Natural Areas Program, and Congaree National Park. He currently resides in Amherst, Massachusetts, but has made annual trips to Florida for firefly fieldwork. Now, please join me in welcoming Richard Joyce to tell us about the fascinating fireflies of Florida, a closer look at a diverse, overlooked, and threatened fauna. Richard, you can now share your screen and begin. Please remember to keep yourself muted and your audio, video screens turned off, and remember to put your questions in the chat. Richard, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm going to pull up my slides.
Okay, great.
All right. So good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for being here. I'm grateful to Scott and to Autumn, Sabina, and all of Audubon Everglades for the opportunity to take you on a journey tonight into the world of Florida's fireflies. The subtitle of this talk, A Closer Look at a Diverse, Overlooked, and Threatened Fauna, includes those words, overlooked and threatened. But by the end of this talk, my hope is that you'll be inspired and better equipped to make this a less accurate description of the fireflies, at least of Palm Beach County. So I work for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. We're a science-based nonprofit that protects nature through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats. We have 4 main programs which focus on endangered species protection, protection of pollinators in managed landscapes like farms, pesticide reduction, and community engagement. The butterfly pictured here on the left is the Xerces blue butterfly, which is the first insect known to go extinct in the US due to human causes. It was found in the Bay Area of California. It's both our namesake and a reminder of why we do the work that we do. Xerces is supported by an amazing community of members who make our work possible. If there happen to be any Xerces members watching today, I want to say thank you for your support. And if you'd like to become a member and contribute to our work, you can do so on our website. So just a little overview of what I'll cover tonight. I'll start with a very quick Firefly 101, talking about what are fireflies and how do they live. Next, I'll talk about the conservation status of fireflies in North America at kind of the big picture level. Then I'll zoom into Florida and introduce you to some of our fabulous fireflies, again, giving some closer attention to the Florida intertidal firefly. And then last, we'll explore some of the many ways that you can get involved in firefly conservation. So what are fireflies? I think it's sometimes fireflies are such a romantic, they bring up such romantic imagery that we think of them almost as mythical beings or almost just as like decorations or a decorative backdrop. But fireflies are a type of beetle. They're a branch in the beetle family tree. And like ladybugs or scarab beetles, fireflies have front wings that are modified to protect their hind wings. That's kind of one of the basic things that makes a beetle a beetle. And fireflies have a few traits that help to distinguish them from other beetles. Your first thought might be, well, yeah, they light up, but that's not actually the most reliable trait, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Most beetles have kind of a hard, thick exoskeleton or skin, but fireflies have pretty soft bodies. That's something you may have noticed if you caught them as a kid. They're pretty easy to smush. A way of distinguishing fireflies from other beetles that look similar is to see if the head is visible from above in kind of a normal resting posture. So if in fireflies, the head shield or pronotum is going to be pretty broad and it hides the firefly's head. So on the left here, that's a firefly with the pronotum pointed out. And the beetle on the right, even though it has an almost identical color pattern, with the black and the yellow and the red, is not actually a firefly. It's a soldier beetle, and you can see that the head shield or pronotum is much smaller in proportion to the head. Fireflies go way back. They go back much longer than humans. We know this from amber fossils, and we also know it from sort of DNA studies. They go back at least 100 million years ago. So fireflies were blinking around dinosaurs, which is kind of a neat image to picture. If someone asked me the question, what does a firefly look like? In some ways, the most truthful response would actually be something like this. These armored, segmented larvae that don't have wings, and they're hanging out kind of on the ground. Fireflies spend the bulk of their lives as larvae. It's a phase that can last months to years versus the adult egg and pupal phases, which each lasts a matter of weeks, usually. So the larval stage is when fireflies carry out one of their most important roles in the ecosystem. They're predators, feeding on snails and slugs, earthworms, and other soft-bodied critters. A larva will stick its skinny head into a snail shell, inject a neurotoxin and digestive enzymes, and then slurp up some delicious snail soup. Sounds really tasty, right? And fireflies' appetite for snails and slugs means that they actually provide pest control in certain farming systems, like in rice paddies in parts of Asia. There's some firefly larvae that do really weird things. There are a couple cases in South America. One in South America that feeds on bat guano, and another that in the high elevations of Venezuela that actually eats little toads, which is just kind of mind-boggling. But if someone asks, what do fireflies eat? Snails, slugs, and earthworms is kind of my, lions, tigers, and bears response. So their production of light or bioluminescence, which we covered in the trivia a little bit, is what fireflies are most famous for. But many people don't realize that, one, not all adult fireflies produce light, or that two, fireflies also produce light during their immature phases. And the purpose of this light really depends on the life stage. So the larval firefly on the left is saying, don't eat me, you'll regret it if you do. The female adult firefly in the middle here is saying, hey, I like the looks of you, I'll be your Valentine, come hither. And the firefly on the right is not saying anything at all with light because it's actually evolved to be active during the daytime and has lost the ability to produce light as an adult. As mentioned in the intro, the adult bioluminescence of fireflies is all about romance and finding a mate. So fireflies have distinctive courtship flash patterns that the males will emit, and in some cases, it's actually kind of a repertoire of multiple flash patterns. And on the screen here, you can see sort of illustrations of the diversity. You'll have some that give single flashes, some are double flashers, and some give kind of sets of 3 or more flashes. And it can be like a metronome of quick blinks, or it could be sporadic flickers, or what are called crescendo flashes that begin dimly, and then they build in brightness, and then they end abruptly, kind of like a firework. And even though fireflies are silent, watching them can almost have a musical feeling because of the rhythms involved. I know some people who almost hear flash patterns, and a helpful way to kind of create identification tools or field notes is to make charts of their flash patterns that almost look like sheet music. If you're someone who likes to bird by ear, I think you'll likely enjoy the challenge of identifying fireflies by flash pattern and taking a closer note of the signals that they're sending. So something I think that the birders among you are kind of well prepared for is that you're tapping into a clue that's beyond just the physical appearance of that animal. There's a group of fireflies called the photurus fireflies, and they look very similar morphologically to each other. I think of them kind of like the Impidinax flycatchers, the willow, alder, yellowish flycatchers of the insect world. They kind of all look the same, but when you tap into their communication with each other, particularly their courtship communication, you can see that they've evolved actually very distinct ways of communicating. One question that I get with some frequency is like, fireflies must be really good for birds. I think that sometimes in the world of insect conservation, we think of insects really for their utilitarian value. So it's either they're like pollinating our crops, or they must be food for wildlife that we like even more. But the answer is that fireflies are probably not very good bird food. So the sparrow on the left has caught a winter firefly. That's one of those non-flashing fireflies. It's got a winter firefly in its beak. And this may have been sort of a naive bird who'd never had a firefly before, because fireflies, when they're disturbed, they'll start bleeding this milky toxic substance that's very bitter. Fireflies contain toxins that are similar to the compounds found in toads, milkweeds, and monarch butterflies. So they're chemicals that might stop the heart of a small vertebrate. I don't know what happened to this sparrow next. This was a photo from iNaturalist, but I'm guessing this was the last firefly that it tasted. Decades ago, there was a Cornell scientist named Thomas Eisner, and he was really interested in the sort of chemical biology of insects. And he did this experiment. I don't know why he had a Swainson's thrush as a pet, but he had a Swainson's thrush as a pet. And over a summer, he fed it hundreds of insects and took notes on, whether the bird gobbled up the insect, kind of was like meh, or was wholly rejecting it and saying, I never want to see that bug again. And fireflies were among just 5 species that were consistently rejected by the birds. So fireflies, they do have predators, but the major predators seem to be other arthropods like spiders or assassin bugs. So now that you have some glimpses into firefly natural history, I want to zoom out and give you a picture of firefly diversity and conservation in the US. So the taxonomy is still in flux, and new species are still being described and sort of introduced to science. But at last count, there were 174 named species in the US. You might be surprised that there are points on this map of firefly records that go so far west. California has plenty of daytime dark fireflies. Those are the fireflies that have lost the ability to flash. And then glowworm fireflies, which I'll show some examples of later. And flashing fireflies can go as far west as the Intermountain West, Arizona. There are fireflies in places like Montana, Colorado. And a pattern in their distribution is that they're especially fond of moist habitats. When you think about what they eat and the fact that they have kind of thinner skin, they like moisture and they need moisture. Which is probably one of the reasons why Florida has so many species and good fireflies if you go to the right place at the right time. The Xerces Society has worked with fireflies since about 2018, and it really arose, our work with fireflies arose out of just anecdotal reports of firefly disappearance, decline, just lots of people saying, I'm not seeing as many fireflies as I used to, what's going on? And fireflies are so charismatic that you would think that someone was working on their conservation, but really no one was. The research, the academic research about fireflies was really focused on taxonomy and kind of resolving evolutionary trees, looking at courtship behavior, really neat questions, but not ones that really pertained to their conservation status. So together with some partners, Xerces formed the Firefly Specialist Group of the IUCN, or the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and released red list assessments for over 130 species in the USA and Canada. The red list of threatened species is an international non-regulatory framework for assessing extinction risk of species with categories along a spectrum from least concern to critically endangered. And then beyond critically endangered, you have extinct in the wild and extinct. It's a non-regulatory list, and it's entirely separate from the federal endangered species list or state level threatened and endangered species list. So what did these assessments find? One piece of it was looking at threats to fireflies. And the threats that really rose to the top were habitat degradation and loss, light pollution, pesticide use, and then to a somewhat lesser extent, invasive species, climate change, particularly drought and sea level rise, and in some places, poorly managed firefly tourism. I'll go into a little more depth with some of those threats, kind of more case studies in Florida. So this was the results of the species assessments of the 130 assessed species, and it's really a multi-part answer. So about a third of the species seem to be doing okay. They're widespread. There's no indications of decline. About a sixth of the species were in threatened categories, so they're rare, there are instances of disappearance, and they have significant threats. More than half fell in this data deficient category, where we just don't know. They may be doing fine, they may be tanking, but no one's paying attention to them, and we don't have the data to have a clear picture. So if you projected the rate of threatened species onto those data deficient species, up to a third of firefly species in North America may be threatened with extinction, which is a pretty sobering finding. Now that you have the kind of big picture of fireflies in the US, I want to zoom into Florida for really the rest of the presentation. I can't tell you, and Lloyd, you're now the most recent person. How many people who I've heard say either that Florida doesn't have fireflies, or that they've lived in Florida for years and have never seen a firefly, or have only seen a firefly once? And to me, this is really unfortunate because Florida actually has at least 53 species of firefly, more than any other state, and there are multiple that are unique to Florida, found nowhere else. These species are diverse in how they look, where they live, and how they go about their lives. Fireflies have come up with some pretty poetic common names to describe them too. So here's the Florida fishhook, Florida single snappy, marsh imp, candle firefly, blue ghost. They sound like comic book superheroes, right? There's even a firefly named after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the champion of the Everglades. And this is a little bit of a digression because they're not strictly speaking fireflies, but I also don't want to neglect the cocuyos, also known as headlight click beetles or fire beetles. They're found in Florida and throughout the tropical Americas. And these are kind of firefly cousins that have inspired songs, poems, books, and they provide endless entertainment to the children who are lucky enough to watch and catch them. You'll notice that the light producing organs are on the thorax or the middle segment rather than the abdomen. They're on top, and they're kind of these two round ones. So really quite different from a firefly when you look at it up close. Among Florida's firefly species are 5 that fall in threatened red list categories. There's the pointy-lobed firefly, the keel-necked firefly, the ant-loving scrub firefly, the Florida scrub dark fireflies, and the Florida intertidal firefly. So I'm going to give you a little kind of profiles of each of these. Not all of these. Some of these could be found in Palm Beach County. Some of them you'd have to go kind of more to the central ridge, like the Lake Wales Ridge, or further north in Florida. So the pointy-lobed firefly is found in northern Florida, though no one's recorded it in decades, in shrubby wetlands. And the name actually refers to the shape of the male genitalia, which are pictured here on the right. So it's a little obscure, nondescript, and really like an expert with a microscope and dissecting tools would need to identify it definitively. The keel-necked firefly is one of my favorites, and the common name comes from a trait that all fireflies in this genus have, this Pyrectomina group. They have a raised line down the middle of their head shield. And starting about 40 minutes after sunset, they give these swooping, glowing green flashes that sometimes rise and sometimes fall. And in Florida, they're found all along the coast and a little ways inland too. They're in the Everglades, kind of marl prairie, mangroves, and salt marsh. And they have an odd distribution. So they're known from Alabama and Florida, And then they're also found in New Jersey and Delaware and Maryland, but they haven't, at least thus far, in at least a century, haven't been found in Georgia or the Carolinas or Virginia. So it's kind of a mysterious distribution. In Central Florida, you'll find a glowworm firefly called the ant-loving scrub firefly. And in glowworm fireflies, the male and female look really dramatically different from each other. The female gives a steady glow. She doesn't have any wings, or she has these like tiny wings that she can't fly with. And then the male flies around, does have wings, and is looking for that glowing female. The glowworm type firefly is mostly what they have in Europe. So if you're familiar with kind of James and the Giant Peach, that's the type of firefly in that story. So this species is only known from the Lake Wales Ridge, and it's associated with ant nests. We don't know exactly why, but they seem to like maybe need the microclimate of the nests or get some sort of protection from them. The females and the larvae will be found, like if you excavate an ant nest of a couple different species, you'll find these fireflies. Firefly species that have flightless females have this added vulnerability, because if they get wiped out in a particular place, it's really hard for them to reestablish themselves. A male can fly to another area, but he's not going to be able to lay eggs and kind of start a new population. Another scrub species that's a little more widespread is a day active firefly called the Florida scrub dark firefly. And they come out in April through the summer, and the males will do these kind of low flights flying through the scrub, looking for the females who are also flightless, like the ant-loving scrub firefly, and kind of tucked into the sand. I have a special fondness for this last firefly, and I'm going to give it a little more attention, and that's the Florida intertidal firefly, Micronaspis floridana. It's a species that belongs to a more tropical group. It doesn't have any close relatives in the rest of the US. The males have these domed windows over their eyes. That's a male on the left, and the females have this single wide lantern that some people describe as being kind of cowboy hat shaped. They're in a habitat where you wouldn't really expect fireflies, or most people wouldn't associate with fireflies. The larvae of these fireflies live in and around the intertidal zone. They're seemingly nowhere to be found during the day, and then at night, you can find them by their greenish glows as they crawl over the damp sand and mud, going in and out of fiddler crabs and fiddler crab burrows, and climbing up mangrove roots. Their main prey are thought to be snails, but they'll eat a variety of foods when in captivity, so they might also do some scavenging in the wild. Here's a photo of a pupa that I found on Key Biscayne in Miami-Dade County. It was tucked into the sand below the high tide line, which means that they're able to tolerate saltwater inundation even when they're in this totally immobile life stage, which is pretty cool. The IUCN, the red list assessment process identified this species as endangered, and the habitat for this species has really shrunk dramatically as mangroves and marshes were dredged and filled for development, especially in the kind of second half of last century. And much of the remaining habitat is caught between seawalls and brightly lit cities and the rising ocean. So at the Xerces Society, we were so concerned about this species that in 2023, we petitioned the US Fish and Wildlife Service to protect it under the Endangered Species Act. In October of this past year, the US Fish and Wildlife Service issued what's called a positive 90-day finding for the petition, meaning that it should undergo a species status assessment and will be considered for protection under the Endangered Species Act. There's a lot of uncertainty here, and we know that even in regular times, this process can take years. So that means that we can't wait for the feds to take action. We need to be collecting as much data as possible and actively working to keep this species around. I'm going to go into a little more detail about some of the threats to this species, particularly light pollution. So there's a large body of research that tells us that light pollution interferes with the love lives of fireflies. It can make it harder for fireflies to find each other and to sort of get to know each other. And this is especially true for fireflies that display later in the evening. So, it's like when you're in a restaurant and it's so loud that you can't hear a word that the person across from you is saying. That's how I imagine the frustration of fireflies in overly lit areas. For most of the evolution of wildlife on Earth, the brightest source of light at night has been the full moon. And many firefly researchers have noted that during the full moon, firefly activity is reduced, while sources of artificial light can be many times brighter than the full moon. I know that you all had a stellar presentation about light pollution last year during the same speaker series. So many of you are probably experts on light pollution. I think one of the frustrating things with light pollution is that Florida has this amazing system of protected areas, national parks, state parks, other conservation areas that have been set aside for wildlife habitat and for people to enjoy. But artificial light, both inside these areas and outside these areas, can make them less hospitable to fireflies. While Florida has real challenges when it comes to light pollution, there are also some inspiring stories of how we can protect dark skies and dark nights. So I'm really inspired by the progress that's been made with communities protecting sea turtle nesting beaches, and I wonder what would it look like if we expanded this to places besides beaches. And sometimes it's as simple as the lighting used at a campground bathroom. That the photo in the lower right is taken at a flamingo sector of Everglades National Park. And these small actions add up, especially when there's a broad vision to guide them. Mosquito sprays often come up in this conversation about threats to fireflies. And I wanted to just give it a little bit of time here because it's a complex issue and I'm still kind of on a learning curve myself. But I wanted to dive in a little bit and talk about it. Mosquito control districts in Florida, they use a variety of tools for controlling mosquito populations. And some of these methods are more concerning than others. One tool they use is spraying, which is kind of the most obvious, visible sort of tool that they use. And they specifically spray two types of compounds. an organophosphate called naled, and synthetic pyrethroids, so like permethrin, things that imitate natural pesticides in the chrysanthemum plant. And they spray these with ultra low volume sprayers, which send out these tiny droplets that stay in the air, and mosquitoes die when they come into contact with these compounds. And the thinking is that, like, because these droplets are so tiny and the volume of pesticides is so low, again, the thinking is that larger insects, insects that are a lot bigger than a mosquito, will not be killed. The other thing that mosquito control districts use a lot of is of larvicides, specifically bacterial larvicides, like these purple kind of blobs here. And that's a bacterium that just attacks the larvae of certain types of flies, like mosquitoes and midges. So it's a much more targeted approach than using a non-selective adulticide. So are fireflies at risk from mosquito adulticides? We're still figuring out the answer, but here's some reasons for concern. One is that fireflies and mosquitoes overlap in habitat and flight times. So, sometimes the people doing mosquito control will say, like, we're going to spray at night because that's when there are mosquitoes out, and we'll avoid the diurnal pollinators and honeybees. Well, that doesn't work. That just doesn't really work for fireflies. They like moist areas, a lot of overlap in habitat. There have been another reason for concern is that there have been several studies showing mortality in butterflies and caterpillars in spray zones. So they'll set up little cages and compare sprayed areas and non-sprayed areas. And there is increased mortality in places that get treated. Another reason for concern is that if you measure pesticide residues just out in natural habitats, you'll find pesticide residues showing up in non-target areas, meaning that pesticides are moving around and they're affecting more than just the areas where you spray them. And the impacts of these pesticides, they can be subtle, they can be sublethal, meaning that they don't kill the insects immediately, and longer term, which makes them like harder to study and maybe a little less obvious. There are also reasons where if you looked at the evidence, you might say, this isn't such a strong concern. So there have been several studies that have they failed to find short-term impacts on like non-target, as in non-mosquito insect abundance in areas that were sprayed using this ultra low volume technology. And again, with these tiny droplets and low volumes, it's possible that even if fireflies are being exposed, it's at a very low level that they can deal with. Still, the guidance that we give at the Xerces Society is to avoid pesticides in the areas that you do control, like your home. Thinking about the fact that what is a grub killer? It's a chemical that will kill beetle larvae. What are fireflies? Well, they're beetles. Where do firefly larvae live? Well, they live in the ground. You can kind of understand going from here, take the logic from there. And also, the goal is not just to not kill fireflies, but to keep them healthy, not change their behavior through these inputs. A piece of guidance that we give for protecting fireflies is to use lighting thoughtfully. So I talked about light pollution a little bit earlier. You can start by using the Dark Sky International guidance of kind of 5 principles for responsible lighting. Is it useful or necessary? Is it targeted? Is it low level, as in low brightness? Is it controlled by things like motion detectors? And is it warm colored, so more towards an orange or red color? But we also need to consider that astronomical light pollution is not the same thing as ecological light pollution, and astronomers may have different needs than fireflies. So really need to try to tailor our actions as best we can to the bugs themselves. Another piece of guidance that we give about just backyard firefly habitat for fireflies, but also for other beneficial insects, is to leave areas wild and less manicured. Leave the leaves where it's practical and possible. And a rotting log is amazing habitat for lots of firefly larvae. Here's a photo of a Pyrectomina firefly larva, kind of tucked into the leaf litter. You can see it's pretty well camouflaged. Another way that you can contribute to firefly conservation is through the Firefly Atlas, which is a collaborative community science project that I coordinate. And it allows firefly enthusiasts, land managers, and researchers to submit survey and observation data, and kind of with a focus on imperiled and data deficient firefly species. You can also, if you search for a species and don't find it, that is really valuable data to have. That's something that we just won't get from museum insect collections or iNaturalist or other sources of firefly data. The Firefly Atlas provides data sheets, survey protocols, and a data portal for sharing what you find. It's a wonderful thing to experience awe and just kind of magic while gathering data that will be harnessed for conservation. In order to collect information that's verifiable and at the species level, the Firefly Atlas protocol goes beyond just snapping a photo. So we ask for data on flash patterns, habitat, and weather conditions. So here's an example of a couple photos of fireflies, putting them in a Ziploc baggie and holding them against like a ruler, or in this case, the Firefly Atlas data sheet is a good way to, one, get a close-up photo where they're not kind of scrambling around, get a photo of the underside, and also show how big it is. And when you're observing flash patterns, it's really important to take the air temperature, because the air temperature is kind of the metronome that sets the tempo of the flash pattern. The warmer it is, the faster the fireflies will flash. So you kind of need to take that air temperature so you can calibrate the information. Part of my job is to travel to different places and survey and look for rare fireflies. I wish that I could clone myself, because there's so many places that I would like to visit to search for fireflies. And Palm Beach County is actually one of those places. So despite being heavily developed and altered in its kind of coastal wetlands, there are pockets of mangrove habitat where Florida intertidal fireflies might be flying under the radar. So last year, county staff in Broward County and Pinellas County teamed up with local naturalists. They went out in the springtime and surveyed local parks. And some of them actually found new populations of the Florida intertidal firefly using the Firefly Atlas protocol. So there's a long list of places that I think would be worth checking out based on the habitat in Palm Beach County. Also in Martin County. The only record of Florida intertidal firefly in Martin County that I'm aware of is a specimen at the University of Florida that was labeled as having been collected at Jonathan Dickinson State Park. I think it might actually be kind of in Hobe Sound National Wildlife Refuge, but it was collected in 1957. So I think we're due for an update, and I'm curious if they're still in the area. I'm assigning that to you as homework to find out this spring. So here are things that you can do this week as so my call to action. You can create a Firefly Atlas account and sign up for both the Firefly Atlas and Xerces Society e-newsletters. You can check out Xerces Firefly resources. I'll show those on the next slide. And ask your local land managers about fireflies, and maybe even explore the possibility of doing some surveys. So I'm gonna end here and take your questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hey, that was a great presentation. We'll share the Firefly Atlas link in the chat so that people can check it out. Everybody keep your questions coming for Richard in the chat. I have a bunch, so if more don't come in, I can fill in. But our first question came from John Shelley, who wanted to know, how do fireflies relate to love bugs, if at all?
I'm blanking on whether love bugs are they're Hemiptera, right? Or are they beetles? They're not closely related, but what you will find in Florida and in other places of the world is that a bunch of insects that aren't very closely related to each other will have similar color patterns. So black and orange and red. And so you'll notice that the Florida scrub firefly, that diurnal one with a very orange head shield, looks very similar to a love bug. And if you went to like Archbald Biological Station, you would find dozens of bugs that kind of have that general body coloration pattern.
Okay. So Kevin Baker wanted to know, you mentioned it a little bit, but the best places in Palm Beach County to see fireflies.
Yeah, I've been to Palm Beach County. I've never been to a natural area at night in Palm Beach County. So I think the answer, that's a multi-part answer. One is the piece of getting nighttime access. We know very little about fireflies compared to like birds. That even if there are people who are excited about doing firefly community science, so many conservation areas just have a sign at the entrance that says open, dawn to dusk. Nobody should be here at nighttime. So that means that we're literally like in the dark about these species.
That's a good point.
Places with moisture, wetlands. Wetlands are great. Darkness is good both for the fireflies and for our own experience viewing them. Seems
Okay.
like
Yeah,
seems
Mark
like there was
Cook, yeah, he mentioned that the Pine Glades Natural Area off of Indian Town Road has a good population near their parking lot. I have seen them in a couple of the scrub natural areas at night. I can't remember what, maybe Lantana scrub. I saw them in the evening there. So they're around. And what's really cool to me is that like you don't think about them being around a lot because you don't see them as much in like urban areas, but that doesn't mean they're not around, right? Like they can be in small pockets of like natural areas. So I guess a question I have is that like, is genetic viability an issue for these populations that are segmented due to like urban growth?
Yeah, so it's definitely a concern. Fireflies you know, some of them can fly. The larvae can walk, you know, maybe a couple 100 meters during their months of lifetime. But they're not like dragonflies or monarchs or, you know, or migratory butterfly species that go miles and miles. Like most fireflies will live and die like in the general area where they were born. There hasn't been a whole lot done on the like population genetics of fireflies. I think it's an area that needs to be studied more, but it's certainly a concern because, you know, we're at a time where if you go to the right places, you'll find firefly populations, but they're more and more isolated, and even if those places are protected, if we come back in 50 years, how are they going to be doing? It's definitely a concern.
Yeah, it's something I didn't think about until your presentation today. So, Jeannie Mauser mentioned that they see them at Green Cay in the evening, which is a park here in Palm Beach County. It's a wetland park, so that's pretty cool. Lewis Matthews says, what do we think about the evolution of the light emitting organ? Did it evolve separately in fireflies and click beetles?
I don't know about the organ itself. I know that there have been some sort of genomics studies done looking at click beetles and sort of phylogeny studies looking at click beetles and fireflies, and production of the chemicals that cause bioluminescence, the gene that produces that has evolved multiple times. It's actually, you know, it's the exact same sort of general type of gene for bioluminescence. You know, it's showed up in plankton and mushrooms. So it's not like there was just like one event in evolution of bioluminescence and then all the descendants, you know, have that trait. It's something that's popped up. But click beetles, they are sort of closely related, and there's some question of like whether the fireflies evolutionary are sort of like nested within click beetles.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
that's a partial answer, but a good question.
Scott says he doesn't remember if you mentioned it or not, but do firefly eggs also glow?
They do. It's very subtle, very dim. I've only experienced it once, and it was at Hugh Taylor Birch State Park in Broward County, doing a survey there, and we saw just this tiny speck on a leaf that was floating in the water, and you know, photographed it up close, and we didn't hatch it out or anything. So it's possible it was a click beetle. I think click beetle eggs will also glow. But yeah, it's a neat thing, but most, you know, it's very hard to observe.
Does that make them more susceptible to predators?
Maybe, but it could also be it could be a warning, you know, a warning signal thing where because a lot of fireflies will kind of give toxins to their eggs as well, so that the eggs will be toxic.
That's cool. Layla Losier says that they've recently seen some at Green Cay at night. And Hit says, did you say whether or not there is a better time of year in Florida to see fireflies?
So it kind of depends where you are and how tolerant of mosquito bites you are. So I'd say that like March through May is a good time. It's a time when there are a lot of Florida, sort of there's a peak in Florida intertidal firefly activity. March and April is when the fireflies actually that are in this photo on the thank you slide, are active. The Florida single snappies. So if you go to like Blue Spring State Park in kind of near Orlando, they're going to be starting in the next few weeks. But it's a long season, so you could spend months looking at fireflies, and you'd see different species appear and disappear, and probably come back after a couple months too. But yeah, come mosquito season, it's a different ball game.
Can you identify fireflies by their light pattern from a video, provided that you also have temperature information to go with the video?
In most cases, probably not. I could maybe get it to genus. So color is helpful, color of the flash. In very like coarse terms can help you get to genus. So yellow tends to be photinus fireflies that are flashing at dusk, and green will often be photurus fireflies that are flashing once it's truly dark. Part of the problem with video is that it's really hard to tell what's a single insect, and when we talk about a flash pattern, it's like what one bug is doing, and if there are a bunch of bugs doing this, it's hard to tell. So the best kind of video is actually not the one that's very like impressive. It's the one that's like you're close up. There's a firefly on the wing. If it's like perched on a leaf, you can't really use that to identify the species. So yeah, what I actually do to get flash pattern information is I use my phone, and I take a voice memo, and I just count the flashes, and that way, I can just have my eyes on the bugs, and then later I can play with software and the stopwatch or whatever, and figure out the timing of those flashes.
Cool. Kathy would like to know, how closely related are glowworms and fireflies?
So glowworm is a very mushy term because it can apply to like 3 different things. So there are flies in New Zealand, and also in like the Southern Appalachians, that are called glowworms, that are very distantly related. They're not even beetles. Glowworms, some people will use glowworm to talk about firefly larvae. And in that case, like it could be the same species, it's just the younger version. And then we also talk about glowworm fireflies, which are the fireflies where the females don't, are flightless, and they're the ones producing light on the ground while the male flies around looking. Kathy, is there a type of glowworm that you had in mind when asking this question?
All right, Kathy, throw that in the chat and I'll catch it if you do. So we'll go to the next question let's see if she'll chime in. So Tyler Fuller would like to know, or he just says, this past Saturday, he observed hundreds of fireflies at the Fish Eating Creek Wildlife Management Area. Don't know if you've been there. That's a really cool area to check out. Scott Zucker says, if I go fireflying, he turned it into a verb. If I go fireflying, what equipment might I need to have better success?
Again, this is a little contingent on like having permission from the land manager. But what I take with me is here. I'm just going to go back to that. Go back to the slide. So on this slide, you can kind of see what I take with me. There's I bring an insect net, like a butterfly net, a camera, a thermometer, and honestly, you can use a cooking thermometer works pretty well, like a digital meat thermometer. Bring a headlamp with a red setting, Fireflies can see red light, and some are even attracted to red light, but it's much less disruptive to the fireflies, and it's also much better for like keeping your night vision out in the dark. I would bring a Firefly Atlas data sheet, and I would also bring. When I started out fireflying, I would use a petri dish, like a plastic petri dish more. I've gone more and more in the direction of just like a little plastic sandwich baggie for taking those up close photos of fireflies. Yeah.
Nan says in Blue Springs State Park, March 14th through April 6th, they have a Firefly program. $20 admission to the park after 5 p.m. And then Fanning Springs State Park in April also has a program, but you have to rent a cabin. So that's cool. I didn't know parks were doing Firefly programs. That's pretty cool. So Kevin Baker wants to know, do bats eat fireflies?
Again, probably not more than once. So there was a neat study a few years ago where they had enclosures with bats and fireflies, and they did some manipulations and learned that the bats they were recognizing their flight patterns to avoid them, like what they look like on the echolocation, and then 2, they were also avoiding their light patterns. So again, they taste awful. So and they're toxic. It's actually like some zoos would have issues with their like reptile exhibits, with like lizards keeling over and dying in the summer in the States because of reptiles eating lightning bugs.
That's amazing. Blake Scarborough wants to know, Blake is one of our amazing social media intern that you were commenting the graphics earlier. Blake is one of the ones that makes it happen. So Blake Scarborough says,
Nice.
I saw so many at Green Cay last Wednesday, right after dark. It's so amazing. Do you know what species, perhaps? It's in Boynton Beach in a wetland habitat.
I think I've seen like one observation on iNaturalist, and one of the challenges with iNaturalist is that like you can often get to genus, but there isn't the flash pattern information or the air temperature and things like that. There's a species called the cattail flash train firefly that does sort of like these strings of like six flashes, and then there'll be a pause, and then another string of 6 flashes. But there's also very likely fireflies in the genus Photurus, and they're really hard to identify, and the taxonomy is like not totally worked out. But it's actually very possible that there are Douglas's firefly, Photurus douglasi, the one named after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, in this at Green Cay as well.
Cool. Tyler Fuller wants to know, have you ever tried Pine Island on the West Coast to look for fireflies? There's a lot of mangroves and upland habitat there.
Good to know. You all are much closer to these sites than I am, so I'm happy to. I'm sincerely very happy to consult if any of you are like, I want to go out and survey. I can put my email address in the chat. Yeah, I've advised like Broward County and Pinellas County on going out and doing these surveys.
Yeah, Palm Beach County has a lot of natural areas too. I don't know if anybody's on the call tonight from Palm Beach County natural areas, but it might be cool to try to do a citizen science type thing, or get something together in their natural areas, maybe in the state parks nearby. Kathy says she saw some glowworms in New Zealand, and also blue ghosts in the Pisgah Forest in North Carolina. In the same forest, there were glowworms.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's your email address. I want to make sure I didn't skip. Oh, Jeannie had said, if you'd like to go to Green Cay and see fireflies, sign up for the Night Stalker tour that's held monthly. There's limited space, so it might take a few months to get a tour, and it's presented by our own Blake. So next time
Awesome.
you're in Palm Beach County, you can sign up for one of these tours. Nan Hennis would like to know, what's the best temperature for start of firefly mating as the beetles come out of hibernation?
So in Florida, they're not necessarily hibernating. It could just be that the larvae are kind of have slowed down and they're still feeding, but they're not growing as fast. I think of it's rare to see firefly flashes below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and really when you're in the 70s and 80s at night is when you're going to see better displays. But for those of you in who spend time in more northern states, it really depends on the species. And I think this is one of what I want to be one of the take homes of this, is that fireflies are many things. For those of you who are birders, it's so much richer of an experience when we recognize, a great blue heron and a bald eagle, and it's not just birds, birds. So there are in the Carolinas right now, or Texas, there are fireflies that are starting to flash before they're even leaves on the trees.
Cool. Pamela Wooten would like to know if you can please show the slide again with all the different patterns of the flashes.
Sure, I can do that. And this is just like a sampling. The charts on the right are just just one genus.
Okay. Scott would like to know, what is the highest number of species you've ever found in one evening at one location?
Last June in South Carolina, we definitively documented, I think 7 species, and there were a couple more. There were, a few more that we were sort of guessed about, but they weren't confirmed.
Okay.
But one of the things with firefly diversity is that you really have to keep going kind of month after month, because it's kind of like bird migration. There's some things that you're only going to see for 3 weeks, and then they go back to being in their larval stage, or there just aren't adults around.
That's sorry, my cat is going crazy. Blake says, okay, the promotion for Green Cay is out of control tonight, so now you have to come out to Green Cay next time you're in Palm Beach County.
Put it on the list.
Add it to the list. It's a really cool site. You should go during the day and at night. Kathy says, my comments above were the response to the question that Richard asked. Yeah, so the glowworms and in the caves. Yeah. And then, so, great presentation. I didn't know there were so many things to know about fireflies. I thought this was an amazing presentation. If there's any more questions, please put them in the chat. But if not, this was really cool, really fascinating. Thank you so much. We'll be sure to share the information with folks about how they can get involved, and your email address, as well as people want to have more information on it. With that, Scott, if you want to finish us up for the evening.
Sure. Richard, that was so wonderful. I was just telling Mary, my wife, that this summer I definitely want to go, forgive me for making it into a verb, I want to go fireflying. And because we're up north and on the property that we've been renting, there are so many fireflies. So I'm just curious now who they are and what species they are. So I'm really excited. Thank you for energizing, our Audubon audience and and specifically me into wanting to know who these fireflies are now.
Well, thank you all so much for your time and attention. I know our attention is precious these days, so I don't take it for granted. And yeah, please do, like, if I can be a resource for your Florida firefly explorations and discoveries, I would love to be able to do that.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll put together a firefly field trip and go somewhere in the evening and see what we can find. That would be exciting. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us from Massachusetts. And hopefully one day we will be in touch again, or maybe you'll come down to Green Cay and we'll see you there. That'd be wonderful. Wonderful presentation. Thanks again. Thanks again, Richard.
Thank you all. Take care. Be well.
Okay, you too. So thanks, everybody. It takes a great team to bring these virtual presentations to you. So thank you to all of them. Blake, of course, who was on the call, who does a lot of the images for the slide presentation that we do, and also for the Eventbrite that you see. Mary, who worked behind the scenes, and Natasha, whose picture was not there, but who also was our Q&A and worked behind the scenes today, and Sabine, of course, who puts a lot of these presentations together. Thank you. And Mark, who couldn't be here tonight, who usually works behind the scenes, and Autumn, who actually invited Richard, who was our guest this evening. So thanks to all of them. So we can't wait to see you on April 1st. April Fools, I guess. Wow. But don't be a fool. Be sure to come to our presentation. We're not going to fool you. When we will be hosting Rob Rossmaneth presenting on the red cockaded woodpecker and the Florida scrub jay, two incredible species. Updates on the reintroduction and population in Jonathan Dickinson State Park. So in our very own Jonathan Dickinson. Anyway, thanks for coming. It was great having you all this evening. Good night and see you all next month. Take care, everybody.